I want to welcome everyone and thank you all for joining us on the Risky Business webinar series. This is the third of 4 webinars, all dedicated to helping healthcare risk, compliance, and security professionals like you grow your career and keep your organization and patients safe. Today's webinar hosts are going to be Dave Harvey, Director of IT Risk and Compliance Management at Fairview Health Services, as well as Chris Logan, Senior Vice President and Chief Security Officer at Censinet. Just a reminder that today's webinar is being recorded. We invite you to use the Q&A feature on your Zoom participant screen to submit questions, which we'll address at the end of the webinar. Both the slides and the video recording are going to be made available to you after today's webinar. And if you wish to receive CEU credits for today's session, simply reply to that email with the slides and the recording, letting us know that, and we'll get those to you promptly. We're looking forward to having you guys here today. And Chris and Dave, I want to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Saul. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning to talk about the third part in this series of Risky Business, really transforming your careers in healthcare cybersecurity. I have the privilege to be joined by such an esteemed guest who has gone through this process and is going to share with you not just his journey, but how his organization is really creating a residency for risk assessors and people that are starting in cyber and helping them grow their career path by taking on some things like standardization, additional training, and giving them the tools and the power to excel in their career. But first and foremost, let's start with introductions. So I'm Chris Logan, the Senior Vice President, Chief Security Officer here at Censinet. I've been with Censinet for a couple of years now. Prior to Censinet, I ran global healthcare strategy for a small organization called VMware, and I spent over a decade as a healthcare Chief Information Security Officer, as well as a bunch of other things before that. But you already know me. You've participated in this series before, so you've seen my face. What I really want to do is turn the floor over to Dave so he can take a moment to introduce himself. Dave, please.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Chris. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to just hear what we're trying to do here at Fairview Health Services, especially in the risk space. So thank you. Basically, what my background has always been in healthcare at some different level. I started out as a software engineer working in radiology systems. Then I transitioned working in biomedical or in the medical plannable field. And for the last 14, 15 years, I've been here at Fairview Health Services. And so taken a number of different roles to get me to where I am today, which has been, I have appreciated. I started out running all our business systems here, transitioned into running cardiology systems for Fairview. And then I moved on to run IT audit, and then moved back into IT to take this role and build up our program around IT risk management. So reason I did that is really as I worked in all those different roles, I wanted to learn how executives were thinking about risk and management. I was very, at least somewhat experienced, running a lot of projects and systems and the risks that went with projects, but not the risks that were related to operations in our business. And so that was what was really intriguing about this role and building a team in that space. And so hopefully we'll be able to explain some of that today as we go through.
Fantastic. I appreciate that background, Dave, and I am looking forward to asking you some questions about how you got to this point with your team. But let me share just a little bit about the series, right? So now we're at part 3. We're really talking about career development, what you've done from a program perspective to really empower your risk assessors across your organization. Now, we started this journey 2 months ago. So we looked at best practices for really managing third-party risk assessments, not just with efficiency, but also effectively. And all those webinars are available to you as a replay, as well as those slides. Last month, we looked at really looking at the risk landscape from an enterprise perspective. So not just digital, but what else is outside of that realm that maybe an IT risk assessor is looking at, and how can they explore those skill sets and bring more people to the table to manage enterprise risk? Now, next month, we've got a great series lined up. We're going to close it out with part number 4, really looking at what's that next generation of governance, risk, and compliance. What does the program need to look like? How do we ensure success in this space? Knowing that governance, risk, and compliance in this space of healthcare can be quite dynamic. But first, let's level set for a second, right? Because if you think about where we're at from a healthcare industry and what we're being faced with, right? We're really looking at this concept of cyber risk translating or correlating directly to patient safety risk. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, of how we've integrated technology and digital into how care is being delivered. But you're facing a confluence of forces as an organization, even as an industry. First and foremost, you're facing acute cyber workforce shortage. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. How do we find those people to fill those gaps? We're going to talk about that with you today. As we also look at it, as we swing across the pendulum, we see things like ransomware increasingly threaten patient care and delivery of patient care. Outages for ransomware aren't isolated to any one single organization or entity. They have a regional impact. So now it's really putting a lot of stress and strain on the healthcare system trying to provide that patient care. Also, we're seeing digital health rapidly expand the attack surface. It's not just about what's in your organization now. It's about those third-party vendors, those fourth-party vendors, and even where care is being delivered in the home, in the car, in the grocery store, right? So care doesn't take shape in one location. It's everywhere. And what that's truly doing is fueling this explosion in enterprise risk. So how do we start to address and deal with those issues is critical to our satisfying our patients' needs and demands. And what we're constantly hearing is that risk is growing faster than what my team is. So if you think about that demand really outstripping the supply, the complexity of the products and services that we're bringing into our org now, and then how do you monitor it? It's not a simple task. It's an uphill battle, but I think we have some solutions for you, and hopefully we can get to the heart of some of those solutions. Why this is important though, because risk is not isolated in one single area or instance, right? It has a direct correlation and impact across the entire organization, whether that's in the clinical space, operationally, financially, or other types of risk, thinking about it from a reputational brand damage and continuity and resiliency perspective. So that's great. There's a State of the Union. Let's start to dive into this. How do you build talent? So Dave, I'm going to ask you a question. You at Fairview, when you're thinking about recruiting and retention, especially with workforce shortages, how are you framing the building and recruiting and retention of that talent within your organization? So what's the problem that we're faced with and how are we starting to solve it?
Yeah, certainly. I think you nailed some of the problems that a lot of industry is facing, but in particular healthcare. And that's really around how do we secure our patients' data? So it's all about that, right? We want to make sure we have great service, but we need to protect their data because there is so much of it. And so making sure that we've got teams that really can help with that is my team's goal, right? So our job is to identify that risk where maybe some of the teams aren't familiar with how to get at that. And then to have the staff that's equipped and knowledgeable enough to dig into some of these new products, new architectures that's coming through the pipeline and get at the issues so that we can either try to remediate or figure it out. How we've structured our department, my colleague and I, is I've got the risk management compliance governance piece. He's got the technical piece of cybersecurity, and we both face shortages, right? As we've built up this program, it's at times been difficult to staff where every position that we wanted, right? There's a lot of competition out there for talent, and we're not immune to that. And so one of the things when we structured the way we did is we were always intending to bring in talent through my arm of the organization. And there's a few reasons for that, right? So one, we can broaden out their experience so they're not just focused solely on cybersecurity, the technical aspects, but they can get a broad view of our environment, our organization, and how we operate. And so we set it up so that there's more junior folks coming in on my side of the house, especially in the space that we're talking about today, Chris. And that is looking at risk and where they come. We get a lot of people applying for jobs, but we really want more junior folks to start into that role, and then they're mentored with someone else. So that's how we're attacking that piece of it. We certainly bring in cybersecurity talent in different roles when it's needed. But I think we're going to talk later how we've transitioned and built up people to assume some of those other roles. So we have a feeder pool coming from the inside.
No, that's fantastic. And I'm not going to make it easy on you today, by the way, Dave. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions, right? So I think about how you're sourcing these candidates. And one of the things that I tend to speak with a lot of folks that are trying to break into cyber somewhere, somehow, and they're going and getting degrees, and some have experience and some don't. In your hiring structure and methodology, what are you looking for specifically? Because I think that skills and traits that people bring to the table that they may not realize actually correlate well into building into these types of roles.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's maybe not always what people would expect, but we've had great success. And that is when we're interviewing people, certainly if they've got some cybersecurity background or a degree or program that they finished, that's of interest to us, right? But it isn't the only thing that we're looking for. And in fact, as we've built the program, the thing that we're most looking for, and I hope our managers, my managers are doing the same, and they've got the same mindset that I do. And that is, as we're bringing in junior people, especially on the risk and compliance side of the house, we want someone who's inquisitive, right? So I don't expect someone to know everything about Fairview. I don't know everything about Fairview. But what I hope that we can pull out of interviews and that people would understand is that being inquisitive and trying to understand how something works is the first big step that I want in a person. If they're not asking questions, if they're just accepting responses from our vendors or other teams that we're working with, then we're not doing our job. We need to get past that first layer of the onion, peel that onion deeper and deeper so that we can understand, how this product works, how this product works in our environment, all the data that's involved. And in a lot of teams, I think a lot of times what happens, Chris, is our teams that we work with, our colleagues are busy as can be. And it's not new for anybody, right? But it certainly is a huge issue for us in healthcare, a lot of products coming into healthcare. And so teams might not always have the time to ask those questions. So they have to be able to, they're smart, but ask questions and not be afraid to continue to ask questions. So once we have that piece, then it's a communication thing, right? So I want our folks, they have to be good communicators. They're going to be with our vendors. Our vendors, like you, Chris, are our partners, right? We partner with people to provide services to our patients. And we want good relationships. That means we're going to have to work through issues to come up. If there's something that needs to be mitigated, we need the kind of personality that maybe all technical folks don't have, but we need to be able to work with vendors, our teams within IT, operations, and our contracting folks to make sure that everybody's understanding what issues we might be uncovering. So those two are really key skills. Asking a lot of questions, not being satisfied with a pat answer, and then being able to communicate and write those issues up so people know what they are. Those are huge for us.
No, I appreciate that. And I just remember having a conversation with you beforehand. It's like, we're looking for curiosity. People need to be curious about what you're doing and going beyond just what the norm is. And that's a skill set that's not taught with a college degree, right? That's something that's really ingrained in the person. It can be learned, go out and understand it. But I love the way that you frame it, how you're looking for somebody who's willing to throw themselves out there. Not only but inquisitive, but also that curiosity factor to really start to dig into the details, because that's where the learning starts to begin, in my opinion. And I know you've seen it because you've done it.
Yeah. So, one other thing I would add to that is, as we're interviewing people, my hope and frankly, expectation is that comes across by them asking us questions during the interview. There's a lot of information that people can bring to the table, but I hope that they're challenging us on with questions that leads us to understand that they're willing to have that, as you pointed out, curiosity. Am I curious enough to really dig into this role and see what it does, what your organization does, and then how I could fit into that. That's important in that whole process.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, let's move forward, because I understand the profile that you're looking for. Now that you have these individuals within your organization, I want to explore, how do you equip them? How do they get them to do their job to a very efficient and effective level, but at the same time, grow their career, right? Because I think that's incredibly important. And the tools behind it are important just as well. But let me skip to this next slide. Your approach. Now, we've had some conversations. We've taken some nuggets from those conversations. I think we've synthesized these down to key areas or key points to where you've really created a cyber residency for these individuals as they joined your organization. So I'm going to frame up these 7 areas and ask you some questions, but I just want to flash this real fast so everybody can see that there's a method behind our madness today. So let's talk about leveraging standardization. Now, within your organization, as you start that cyber residency and you find those right people, how are you getting them to, 1, be productive, but 2, get to that next phase where they're having those communications, really starting to get beyond the walls of their comfort zone to not only interface with your vendors, but with your business?
Yeah, certainly. We've made a pretty quick journey from where we were when I first came over to where we are. And this is exactly where we wanted to be, right? So we started out writing assessments, right? So it really relied heavily on the person who was doing the assessment. And that limited us to who could actually be working in this space. So now with a standardized approach, which is where we always wanted to be, where I always wanted to be, that takes some of the onus off the individual having to be an expert in a lot of different areas, because our tool and our platform provide them with that standard content, right? That was huge to us to get to a point where we could bring in more junior people and help them. So when we bring someone in, once we've identified the candidate and we're happy with them, they're here, then we put them through a training program, not only with the tool, because the tool is a huge piece of what we're doing in this space, but we have them meet with a lot of different teams, including all of the cybersecurity team, because they're going to be working with all of the team, not just my teams, right? So it's getting, lack of better terms, indoctrinated into our organization, who some of the teams are, who some of the players really are. And then we hook them up with a mentor to help them understand that. And then we start walking them through coaching exercises with contracts and products that are coming through, right? So that they learn, what's the approach? It's quite well defined on our side of how we do that. But even with that, Chris, right? Everything's not defined, right? So now they have a mentor to see how everything is supposed to work and what the final outcome should be, and go through a series of those before we, cut them loose to do, work on their own. And work on their own doesn't necessarily happen just as themselves. So they now then would start working on assessments. They bring those assessments back to more senior leader, maybe the manager. If there's something really, off, it'll come to me, but the teams handle most of that. So they work within their team and their mentor to make sure that they're looking at these new products and vendors correctly, and they're interpreting the results from our standardization correctly, and then dealing with any, corrective action gaps that come through there. So they have a mentor for quite a while, and that mentor doesn't leave them, right? We have a principal analyst that sits in this space that once they're off on their own, doing all the things I said, working with different teams, working with the vendor, working through those, that if they've got issues or concerns, and then they can come back to that kind of staggered up leadership, right, to get support. And so that's the process we take them through. And then, they'll at that point feel comfortable. They know who to go to. They know, other leaders, other principals on teams to kind of help them with that and help them with that write-up, so that we get that inherent risk, and then we get the residual risk written down so that we know where we're at, and then we're off and running, and then contracting can finish their job and get vendors and products in here. So that's the process we follow.
Yeah, I love it. This concept or idea is that there's guardrails, right? We have these guardrails set up, but they're not solely containing this individual and their ability to go do their job.
Correct.
Really to give them focus and clarity about what's the end goal we're trying to get to. Oh, and by the way, sometimes you got to jump the guardrail, man. That's just the way that life works, but they're still there for you to help guide that process and that work. I think
Absolutely.
That's a fantastic example. And that's one of the things that we're highly focused on as an organization, as we work with the industry, is like, how can we help establish those guardrails to get people focused on what matters most in this process, as opposed to all the additional noise that's out there that could cause complexity in the process?
Yeah, I think, the guardrails analogy is a good one, right? We learn in IT a lot about project risk, right? As I stated earlier, right? We're talking about a different type of risk here. Yeah, there might be a risk, but I'm not concerned about schedules and budgets. That's the teams who own these products, right? We're really looking at how does this fit within the organization? And does that open us up? Your initial slide of the challenges of cybersecurity, for all industries, healthcare in particular, right? Ransomware, locking up our data, all of those things, are part of our standardized assessment. And that helps that junior person, and frankly, helps all of us, make sure that we're looking at it from a consistent manner so that we aren't stepping past those guardrails very far.
Fantastic. I appreciate that follow-up. You start to talk about, you actually teed this one up perfectly with your last comment, talking about this concept of widening the aperture and looking at project risk versus business risk, right? So you started to tease that out with that very last slide, which is perfect timing as we transition. So now that you have your guardrails established and you're training these individuals in this residency, how are you getting to think differently about just the risk that this brings to the table from this product and how it impacts business and IT projects across the entire organization?
Yeah. I think in the last 2 years in particular, Chris, we've moved the needle past looking at kind of just the basic project risk to business risk. And we do that a few different ways, right? Part of that is the way we report that up through the organization, right? So we use obviously different, security committees to express the risk that's coming through, right? We share that with the CISO, and then we also share this kind of information with the board, right? So we're obviously reporting, metrics and information, risk that we see that the organization is taking on with senior leaders, the executive type leader, and bringing that forward. So we have those more junior people, including our leaders on the team, present a lot of that information. Now we're presenting to the board, but in the organizational context, they're presenting that risk to our leaders because they're looking at it from a business perspective, what they need to get done.
Yeah.
And we're obviously trying to support that every way possible. But that's taking that write-up, not making it so technical, right? Making sure that the write-up is not drafted in technical terms, but operational terms and impact that might hit them long-term, because we're not looking at this assessment as just a one and done situation. That's what we used to do. We used to have that. We had no time. We had no way, doing custom assessments. We could not continue to assess this vendor as it morphed over time. In healthcare, right, we use vendors, we stretch them as far as we can go. So having a report that we can then share, the different types of risks and what that looks like in the standard format, you see it on the screen. That's what we're teaching our folks to communicate themselves. So it isn't Dave Harvey that has to be in all those meetings. They can do that directly with our users and our partners. Sure.
No, that's awesome. And you're teeing these next slides up just perfectly, by the way, as we look at this process and we roll through, because now, if you're looking at it from a business perspective, now you can see those interdependencies. And I think this is something that you made a point on about communication. And one of the skills that you're looking for with an inquisitive mind is, how do I now communicate this information? It's not just to the business at this point. There has to be an understanding about what the entire ecosystem in your environment, as well as what's the vendor's role there. So share with me just a little bit about how you're focusing that team now in this residency on really looking at those types of interdependencies.
Yeah, it's kind of a triangle shape on the screen, right? We have a huge triangle. Not only do we look at the risk of that product, but we also look at the risk to privacy. So we have a very good relationship with our privacy departments here. We work on almost a daily basis with them. The same with our legal department, right? There's certainly aspects we go back and forth. They're wanting us and needing us to bring forward any risk that they see in the organization, and then we deal with it, of course, right? There's always that aspect. If we we get into some type of cybersecurity incident, that we have that partnership as well. But on a day-to-day basis, those are two primary players that our younger analysts and team work with, right? And they are all focused on the business, right? They know technology plays a huge part of that. On the IT side, again, they take that standardized report that you just saw, that summary of what this product is. That's part of our contracting process. So we're tied coupled completely within our IT vendor management office, as well as our supply chain office, right? So our processes are used on both sides of that equation, right? So we are everybody within IT knows that we're going to do an assessment and look at that vendor and help them with that contracting process. And we are way upstream with that process now. Teams, when I say we moved the needle, that was one of the needles that we were able to move, is that teams are engaging us sooner, engaging contracting, so that if there is a risk that we have to mitigate, we have time to do it. There's times that we can't get them all, right? And we'll assume some risk. But that's where that real hard engagement happens with the team, is within IT and the business, right? Because they are our colleagues in IT. They own that business relationship. They bring us to the table and then have us explain to them what the situation is. And frankly, they'll set us in front of their vendors because it's their partner. And like I said earlier, our vendors are our partners. We rely on them. We need them. And we want to make sure that we're working through any issues that we see, because as products come in, we might make some changes on how it fits within the organization. Vendors have been great to support us in that, but that the standardized assessment help us figure out those gaps and keep track of them. And so that's where the team, those analysts, are having those conversations with all of these players. And it doesn't have to be upper management, right? I don't have to step in. They address those issues and work through the risk with all those teams. And part of that is to have those relationships. And then those relationships carry on as those folks move into other roles and areas in the company.
Empowering the individual at that level to be able to step out their comfort zone and engage the rest of the business and have a dialogue and a conversation. And also removing some of the friction from the process with the standardization. Again, I keep saying you're teeing these slides up perfectly, because you started to talk about getting upstream in the contracting process. Mm-hmm. And when you've created a framework for delivering assessments that are timely to the business, that are understandable, you get more engagement now from those other parts of the organizations, which normally would be the ones giving you the Heisman, quite honestly, right?
Yes.
Now they're engaged in the process. So you touched on this a little bit. Now we're going to dig. I'm going to probe you a little bit deeper about how you've learned to problem solve and how you've gotten in front of this process, especially with the rest of the organization, IT with their partners, to get included into that contracting process.
Absolutely. So, like I said, the problem is, right, we're moving 1 million miles an hour, right? Technology's changing all the time, constantly, as it should. Right. Love technology. I've always been part of it in my working career. But there's problems that come from that. Right. And all of our teams, as they work with vendors, they're looking at capabilities, and we, with our enterprise architecture colleagues, look at how that really fits into the organization. So there's problems that come up with that process. And as we've been able to put hooks in the different processes around bringing in different vendors and their products and how they work with the rest of our portfolio, right, issues arise, right? And so connecting them, all of our analysts at the entry level and above, connecting them with our security architecture team, basically the other IT teams, pointing out those problems. So we train them to show, okay, if with the standardized approach, if we know that there's low risk, we're not going to have to take that to other teams. But where there's more risk, moderate or high risk, then we have to work closely and then articulate what those problems are and how and what we can do about them. So we basically try and keep a process of that moving forward so that they run the conversations. And there's pushback, right? I mean, there's there's always pushback to, hey, this is taking too long. But as we explain what the issue is and kind of the ramifications, certainly I think the rest of my colleagues within IT have, you hear it on a constant basis in healthcare where people get, breached, data gets lost, someone gets in the environment, locks you up, especially ransomware. And in our operational partners also see that, right? So they're understanding more now of what we're trying to do on their behalf so that none of our systems or processes or where our data gets lost or breached. So that problem is really, we're supported by legal and privacy. And then we bring up that third leg of the table to bring in the risk piece of it. And then we just share that with different committees. So it's really it's problem management. It's a hard thing to kind of document and talk about because, we have some problems every week that we have to bring forward. We've got on the another team for my team is kind of the risk management piece of governance, right? So the exceptions to any security policies is on another team that resides within me. So we basically then take the problems that we see, if we can't mitigate further, then we take them to that team and work through with our IT partners, kind of the exception process. If we decide we're going to move forward with something and what that looks like. So that's kind of the last phase of our problem management of it is, okay, we've mitigated as far as we can. Now we need to go to look at an exception process and see if there's anything else we can do. And then it's a matter of then, higher ups in the organization accepting that risk.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I think the way you're framing this is, again, that's the empowerment of the people that you're bringing in to conduct this work. They're really now being exposed to parts of the organization and utilizing what you've given them from their residency to make this stuff known through those committees. So they're building upon their career as they're moving through this process because they're being exposed to things that, let's just say in other organizations, they just wouldn't be exposed to. I think that's a very powerful statement to how people can journey through their cyber career here because, normally you just thrown to the wolves. Like you get promoted. If you weren't trained to get to this point, you're thrown to the wolves. And now what do I do? You're truly creating a group of individuals that are working collaboratively to start to frame those problems and preparing them for their next role.
Absolutely.
There's something to be said about that. And I think that's thing that we really need to reemphasize as we look at how we're building the next breed of cyber practitioner.
Yeah. My hope, Chris, the way I try to lead the department is to build people who not only think for themselves, but act on their own, right? If there, we set some high level guardrails in using your words and we empower them, right? If for some reason we make a mistake, we'll fix it. We're going to fix it. We'll deal with it. We just ask people to let us know, hey, this happened. Okay, we'll go fix it. And in helping them be confident in making decisions, with the best interest of the organization and ultimately the best interest of our patients. That's what we're always after. Yeah. And so that we always keep that in mind as we're making decisions. And I hope our whole staff feels empowered to think that way.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. I want to make sure that we're taking the time appropriately. We got a couple more things to get through. Sure. So as we're thinking about this, with the guardrails that we've been put in place with the standardization, the empowerment to speak this to the volumes and the masses of people to create a frictionless process, how do you understand how risk changes? Right. And again, I think you hit on this with the previous conversation as well. It's dynamic in nature. So how are you managing in this regard and empowering those individuals to understand where risk is driving change in the organization and the frequency of what that change actually means?
Yeah. We did that prior to having a standardized tool, your guys' tool, we did a really poor job of assessing that evolution of a product or the vendor and their product in our environment. Because like I said, right, we've got products that have been in the environment for quite some time. And we expect to leverage those products heavily to invest because at the end of the day, our patients are paying for the things we're doing. And so having a standardized product has allowed us to do something we couldn't do before. And that is reassess our vendors and products.
Yeah.
And so what we've done is we've set a standard about what the cadence is going to be when we're reassessing product. Because we know that if we only waited until the contract renewal comes up, wow, that product changed a lot during that time frame. And so what would happen is we would miss a lot of that unless someone just came and told us, hey, I don't know if we should tell you this, but we're changing how we're using this. Now, based on the risk level that we finalize that product and vendor on, will tell us what the cadence is going to be, right? Obviously with sensitive data and where that data resides, it's going to have a higher risk value. So it may be a reassessment every year. It may be every 18 months. It may be every 2 years, right? So we're not waiting for our partners in supply chain and the BMO to tell us, oh, this contract is coming up, or we get notified there's an assessment to do. We actually are out front of that now. And that's been a huge change for us, to get out in front of that, because I'm telling you that, as we all know, the technology is changing fast and our vendors love them. Great. They're changing their products. And as we push more and more, especially in healthcare, to the cloud, we see more and more evolution within those products and capabilities. And so that helps us. And our users, our clinicians, our nurse base, they're creative. They're smart people. They're looking to extend the use of products to everywhere possible, right? To help our patients. And that's the beauty of, I think, being in this role is, one, we get to see that firsthand. We don't have to just be out at the site. Like when I was in cardiology, I was out there with the physicians and seeing what they're doing with their practice. Mm-hmm. But in this role, we see those evolutions happening, and our doctors and nurses are just as concerned about our patient data as we are. So they come to us with ideas, and that allows us to go back to that assessment, now update it. And now we've got an accurate picture of what that portfolio of systems, because we've got a huge portfolio of systems within Fairview, and that it just keeps evolving. And we need to be able to report and assess on that. So that has been a great aspect of having the tool in place. Is, one, we're reporting on what we have. Two, we assess them more than, wow, we didn't assess this for 5 years, right? Because we've had those, in the past, and now we've got that. So that's been a huge, I think it's helped everybody, not only us, but operations, our IT colleagues, to start ingraining more of risk practice in what they're doing, cyber risk practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Deeper levels of engagement, right?
Absolutely.
That's all we could ever ask for. And that's what we strive to do. It's fantastic. Now, we talk about deep levels of engagement, making sure standardization, people are out in the organization, they know who your assessors are. How do you communicate it? Like you said that you had a couple of committees that you worked through. How do you start to communicate this stuff up and empower those entry-level, junior-level analysts to really be empowered to speak their voice in their mind up to the board of directors so they understand what the risk is within the organization?
Yeah. So, right now what we're really doing is at the IT executive level, we make sure that they and their, manager come and present this information, right? So it isn't just Dave Harvey doing it. I want to make sure that our leaders within IT, first and foremost, are seeing the work that our folks are doing on their behalf, right? With their teams. So we have them present their findings and ideas to our IT leadership team. And then we do that the same. We've got, we just had some of our folks over looking at our rev cycle, right? And explaining kind of the IT risk management compliance paradigm, our security awareness programs. So we have them give those presentations versus us, right? As the director, which is always fun to do, but I love to see them out there, because now they're fielding real world questions. They're doing all the work. I'm not. They're getting real questions that we can then follow up and help those departments. And so we go out and do that a lot, is share information outside of IT. We just got invited to the system compliance committee, right, this week. And so, we'll have some of the team out there showing what the department is doing, some of our metrics, not only from this tool, but others, of what we're doing on behalf of products, to keep us compliant, right? Because that's ultimately that combination of compliance, privacy, IT security, and that's what we're doing. So what I've been doing is pushing people out there to give those presentations. They do a fantastic job. creates, some interest into our program, and then we can bring that back with those folks.
Now, from a career perspective, I'm taking a wild left turn. I'm yielding to the left here a little bit.
Yep.
Now, I don't want to say most organizations, I'm not framing it appropriately. Maybe as an entry-level analyst, maybe as that junior risk analyst, I may not be afforded that opportunity. What recommendation would you give to that individual who's trying to grow their career, who may have some roadblocks there, to be able to get the opportunity to have that conversation with IT leadership? And I know this is a wild outside pitch, but you're going to swing at it and hit it.
Absolutely. I'm glad. I hope that people would look for those kinds of things and not be afraid or believe that they can't do them. Right? I want people to bring forward ideas, and anybody on our team has great ideas. So I want them to bring those ideas forward. I want them to present to us as my local management team. And then we're going to certainly bring that up, right, to the CISO or the chief digital officer, whoever. But I want them to, first and foremost, be thinking about things we should do differently. And they're the ones in the trenches doing that work. I encourage everybody, and we've had some really great success. We're going to talk about that, to bring forward ideas of how we could do things better and how we can partner with other teams better, right? I am not afraid to lose people within our team to other teams, because if it's better for Fairview, it's better for all of us on the Fairview side. And so I encourage people, to step outside. If their career interests have them going somewhere else, great. We'll help you with that. My only thing is I hope I get a chance to help them before they leave the organization, right? If they were to leave there, but I will help them. And I know my managers will help them bring up those ideas so that they can get the credit for bringing forward those ideas. And then we're going to have them lead those ideas forward. So that's what we've been trying to do with our folks, and encourage that, to bring up ideas. So we have people come to our security leadership team meeting where the leaders are there and have people present there. And it gives them a flavor of starting to talk in forums that they might not get somewhere else. And then we keep moving them up in those conversations.
That's awesome. I appreciate you taking a chance and throwing your opinion there, because I completely agree with it. And by the way, it ties into the next slide.
Yep.
That was not on purpose, by the way. That was a complete accident. But I think it's incredibly important, because I think one of the things that you bring to bear when you empower those folks is this ability to never stop learning. And what you're building there is you're really developing team members as people leaders. And I think that's incredibly important, because even though I may not have a team of 7, 8 people behind me, I still need to be a people leader to influence up. And I need people to really start to think about that in their career trajectory, because it's not how big your team is, it's how well you lead up and help people understand what the real problems are in the organization and how to solve them, because you got good ideas. So frame for me what you're doing there at Fairview, so that you can actually create those team members, develop them to create people leaders and coaches.
Yeah. I think going back to what we originally looked for is, right, that inquisitive, curiosity, questioning person, in a very professional way, of course, right? Not challenging. And sometimes we'll have to challenge, but you can challenge, issues professionally, right? And if you need to take something offline, which we talk about, we deal with it. But having that ability, I think, to persuade in a matrixed environment is huge, right? And if you don't have relationships outside of your own team, at least in this role, you're going to not have a lot of success. So that's one of the things that we try and push people to is you do not need Dave Harvey sitting at the table to call the privacy officer and talk about an issue. You can do the same thing with legal. Now, sometimes it might help for me to get you in there, but that's it. You're running that show. But having those conversations can be somewhat daunting sometimes for maybe junior people. So we help them, prepare for those opportunities and give them feedback. But it's all about moving up the ladder. I want everybody to move up the ladder. I want someone on my team to take my job because we prepared them so well, and then I'll go do something else, right? I want that for our teammates. So you can kind of see on the slide how we fashioned that to keep building people up so that they can go and and help Fairview help their career. I want people to have great careers at Fairview. And we're going to do everything we can to help them with that. Part of that process is we try and get them out of the office. We're remote, but we get them out of the office, get them to seminars. We also coach and encourage them to take certifications. Now we'd love certifications if someone's coming in with some, but we also want to build them up on their way, right? We want to give them tools that expand them past my dreams for them, their own dreams, right? So we want to encourage it. So we help them pay for, tests that they can take, help them with books, those kinds of things. We've got a training budget, but we limit it some, but we always pay for certifications. So people are always taking certifications to expand their skills. And we've had a number of people be able to do that and then work themselves into some other areas. So it's all, principals, our top kind of analyst technical spot, people who aspire to that level. Awesome. Great. We're going to help them get to those level and find opportunities, mentor them so that they can see, hey, here's some feedback to help. Hey, try this next time in that presentation. And then that will help you get to that level. But one of the things they need to do is have exposure.
No, I appreciate that. And that's great because I think the next piece of the puzzle, right? So we've walked through your process with standardization, understanding business risk, communicating up, giving the ability to go out and have the opportunity to have that conversation and build their career into more mentorship and people leaders.
Yeah.
Share with us some success stories because I think that really ties it all together at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. I'm especially proud of the 3 individuals that we've got listed here. They are incredible employees. They're talented. They have all the attributes that you and I just talked about, Chris, that incredibly inquisitive nature, that willingness to just kind of keep peeling that onion back and ask questions and take on assignments to kind of further their repertoire, their toolbox, their career. Right. And so Ernest, Dan, and Eric have been all of those. Eric was the first person I hired. We started with a very small group of people. I did an informational interview with him. And so he set it up. Someone had recommended that. And I said, yeah, I'd love to do intervention or informational interviews with people within the walls of Fairview. I think that's what we should be doing, right? Let's use and leverage and create opportunities for talent within the organization. Eric was one of those folks, right? So he started doing assessments for us in our manual approach. He then helped us, get set up with our standardized automated approach. He's helped with another risk quantification tool that we stood up. And then he actually went over to one of the cybersecurity teams for a while. And then he came back and then we assumed vulnerability management on my side, kind of the risk mitigation process. And Eric is one of those people who's just a go-getter, right? He's extremely talented. He does cybersecurity competitions on the side. He does certifications and we just couldn't be happier with his progress and all that he's done. He's now a principal within our teams. He runs our vulnerability management practice. And it's just done a phenomenal job in the last 9 months of removing vulnerabilities in our environment and putting a real program together with that. So that was Eric, right? He started out informational interview. And the minute I interviewed him, I knew, hey, I told him that day, the minute we have a slot open for it, I hope you apply. And so he did. And we hired him. He's just been killing it ever since. Dan was a similar scenario, informational interview, recommended by Eric, and did the same thing. Just had conversations with him in a very similar background style. Somebody who's, Dan is really willing to get out there and ask questions, still continues to do some of the work within our assessment space if we get behind. So he helps out with that. But Dan has had that similar progression that we stayed the full time within my teams, but he started out as a junior analyst. He went to senior rather, quickly. And now he moved over under Eric into our vulnerability management practice. And going back to what I said earlier, I want people to move around. We created this structure. So people would find things that they're interested in, keep being challenged, and then try new things. Dan's one of those examples who's done that perfectly, right? He's done exactly what he wanted to do for his career. We've been able to support that. he does the same kinds of things, gets out there and gets certification. But he's also one of those people that just like Eric, presenting to upper management on what they've had. And so another wonderful opportunity or success story, I believe, that Dan has had, and we've been able to support him in his career. Ernest is the same thing. He actually came from finance and came over looking for that same kind of opportunity. And as a finance guy, he knew very well all the vendors and products we're having, but he didn't necessarily have that background. So we were able to help him, come alongside him with that. And so he worked heavily within our assessment process, working with vendors, really managing that for that manager, helping get us set up and getting a repeatable process, right? Because we had to transition from our old written process, our custom process to our standardized process, which took a lot of conversation and ensuring that we had buy into the process. So Ernest was able to do that. He wanted to pursue management, frankly, in his career. And so I was doing mentorship once a month. We had him run our PCI program. So I'm responsible PCI here at Fairview. So we gave him some of those projects in addition to what he was doing with our assessment program. Now he's come over as a principal analyst on one of my other teams where he's responsible for the policy piece of the arm of our team. So we've had great opportunities, I hope, for these individuals and everybody else on the team to move up. There's others on the team that have been able to start in this space and then take those tools, those learnings, and then move up into other opportunities. And here's 3 examples of how we've tried to apply that.
That's absolutely fantastic. And I think it's incredibly important to share those success stories. In the residency program that you've built at Fairview, using those tools to get people in the door and getting them moving on up into the organization, it's just a phenomenal, kudos to you and the rest of the team there for actually putting it in place, having faith and confidence in these folks to drive it to completion and see their success. I think that's the measure of us as leaders. Our success is the success in the people that we meant to bring into the organization. So
yeah, I will only be successful if they're successful, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We're rounding down. We got a couple of minutes left. So I just want to synthesize and bring some information back, what we've learned today, what sense that's helping deliver and expanding value within your organization. If you think about your vacancies and turnovers, assessment throughput, skill mix, and cyber insurance, how have we benefited? Not only with the residency program you put in place, but the tooling that you've brought into this mix now.
Yeah, certainly. I think you say it right on the screen, right? We have less turnover because people have a framework to work within instead of having custom assessments all the time. So that's been a huge piece. And then the other thing that I would advocate is, as industry's changing, as the vendors we use and the products are changing, our standardization is changing right along with them, right? We don't have to retool everybody up so quick. Example is artificial intelligence, right? Machine learning, right? So those things are in our product. So that helps our team and helps our individuals, even though we're all, working as fast as we can to understand this space and how it's going to be here. So that's one aspect of it, right? Throughput, right? We can get things queued up. More of the work now is on the vendor than it is on us, right? So we set up with the tool to help with that. So it isn't, frankly, we had a lot of escalations, right? We could hardly hire enough staff to do all that we're doing, right? And so we've been able to really use more junior folks to help us in this space, but have less people. We could have had a cadre of people doing custom assessments. We'd have always been behind. We're always behind, frankly. I was always getting an escalation. Somebody's upset about something. We don't get those today, right? So that has helped us move it along for our partners. That to me is key, right? Keep moving these things along, understand the risk, but do it quickly, right? And support them. So, and then basically that reassessment, that's one piece that frankly, we can queue them up. We can work with the vendors. We've got automated, reminders, to get things done. And then we can then focus on how the environment is evolving. And that's key for us. So those 4 areas are important.
Excellent. So I'm going to thank you for sharing your time with us today and all the wonderful thought-provoking information that you gave to us. not only on career development, but also how leaders should be thinking about how they're developing their staffs as well. So thank you for joining us, Dave. I appreciate it. I'm actually going to pause and thank everybody for sticking on with us today as well. And I know there were some questions that came through. And again, if you have questions and we don't get to them, put them in the Q&A. We'll find a way to get you those answers. But I'm going to turn it back over to Saul for the Q&A section at the last 5 minutes here.
Chris, thank you. And Dave, thank you as well. Fantastic job today. And thanks everybody for joining us. We do have some questions in the Q&A. So why don't we go ahead and start handling those? First one here. Feeling so strapped in the day-to-day, looking for the number one thing I should focus on to alleviate some of it.
I'll totally respond, right?
Tee it up, buddy.
Yeah, we have lived in this space, right? And one of the things we like the person who asked the question, right? It's nonstop, right? We have contracts flying through and products flying through at all times, right? Standardization definitely was a key component to that cog, right? I mean, like I said, we couldn't hire enough people to continue to do what we're doing and do a really good job. So standardization, right? Finding a tool, using a tool to do this process was key. And I'll be honest, it took me a little while, took us a little while to get to the tool we wanted. We talked to vendors, right? And what is it for our environment? And that was what I was after, right? Standardization so that we could then, if I wanted to bring in a contractor, I can bring in a contractor, or I can use an FTE to work in this space. And we're loading a lot of our old vendors in here, existing vendors, so that we can get that. But that's how we're trying to get past that. Oh my goodness, there's so much, I can't get to it all. The other thing is we're focusing, people in this space, and the rest of it's going to be handled by someone else, because this is a priority for me to keep things moving into the organization.
Excellent. Thank you, Dave. Really appreciate that. I've got another one here and see some hands up as well. If you want to just use the Q&A feature there and type in your question, that'd be great. And we could get your question answered. So thank you for raising your hand. Next question here is best advice to show quick value, trying to advance in my organization and would like to stay internal if possible.
Yeah. For me, it's in my career, I've always had partnerships across IT. So I didn't just partner within my existing team. I was curious, and I've tried a lot of different roles. I did that in the med device world. So first, best advice is don't be afraid to go try something you're not that good at. You're already in the door. There's needs. You can take the experiences that my team is having, and they can apply those to a lot of different roles. So leverage yourself, sell yourself. Don't cut yourself short. You're valuable. You're already in the door, and you've got things to offer the organization outside of the job that you're doing.
That's really great advice, Dave. Thank you. We got a comment here. I wish I could be on Chris's team. He's so enthusiastic. I love it.
Careful what you wish.
Next one here. How was your experience with Censinet overall as a tool to help you with vendor risk?
Good. I'm really pleased with the tool, right? There's a learning curve, mostly for our partners, right? So we when we decided to move in this direction, we spent a lot of time with our partners, primarily within the application space, but vendor management, supply chain, et cetera, helping them understand that we're moving in this direction, right? You can't just dump it on them, right? They're used to us, being able to just write an assessment if something came up, moving that work to our vendors and then responding to it. So basically, we did a lot of legwork with the organization to help them understand that we're going to move to a standardized process and that the outcomes would be better than what we were giving them, right? Because we played off the fact of, you get a lot of escalations, we just can't keep up. And we're not able to reassess your products as you move. So we did that with the organization. All the groups I mentioned, whenever we could get in with operations, we do the same thing. We have a pharmacy business here. We did that with them, and we actually invited them to use the tool as well. So that's how we did it, is a lot of upfront work.
Outstanding. Thank you for that, Dave. And we got a lot of thank yous in there. So really appreciate everybody jumping on. And we're right at time. So want to thank everybody for joining us today. Fantastic work, Dave and Chris. Really appreciate you guys and the work that you guys do to make patient safety more possible. And thank you all for attending today's webinar.
Appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Have a great day. Take care now.
Hopefully that worked out.